Welcome to What to Do When, a podcast from real lawyers with real perspective, where we explore a variety of legal issues and scenarios. Each week, we focus on a new topic and discuss what to do when and if any of these legal scenarios ever happen to you or a loved one. With over 40 years of combined legal experience, our hosts offer their unique perspectives and insights on a range of real-life legal situations.
Hi, and welcome back to another podcast at Critzer, Cardani here in Richmond, Virginia. I'm Jackie.
And I'm Scott. Jackie, what's on the docket for today?
Today it's what to do when you are charged with reckless driving by speed. So it's a little bit of a follow-up to our reckless driving podcast. This is more specific to reckless driving by speed.
And the reason we want to do this is because a lot of people don't really understand this, because for a long time, the rule was 20 over is reckless driving, period. And, you know, with speed limits going up and things, it's not so easy. So obviously, what is reckless driving by speed? It's when your speed is 20 miles over the speed limit, except for what?
Except for when it's in excess. Is it 85 or
it's 85?
So when it's 85.
Right, over 85.
Okay.
In excess, you said it right. In excess of 85.
Okay.
So the reason that's important is because, as you know, in Virginia we have 95 and 64, which in certain places have 70 miles an hour. So people think they can go 20 over and still be outside of, or 19 over, maybe say 19, and still, you know, be 20 under, and it's not reckless. But the caveat in Virginia law is if you're over 85, you're reckless. So really, when you're in a 70 mile per hour zone, you only get 15, not 19. So it happens to a lot of people. They don't understand it. Say, well, I thought it was 20 over. So we wanted to take a moment and explain to you that reckless driving by speed is 20 over or 85 is your max regardless. So when you're doing 90 or 89 and you think you're okay,
Definitely not.
definitely not. And you know, where people really, I see a lot of these is in the smaller communities where somebody's in a 45 going 65 or 66 or 70, like down Broad Street, for instance, in Goochland, or places like that, or Chippingham Parkway where people fly. Mm-hmm. So it's really easy to get the flow. And we just wanted you to know that because we didn't want you to be ignorant without knowledge of what's going on. And so once you know that, you have to kind of say, okay, what happens if I get a reckless? What is a reckless?
Isn't it just speeding? I mean, it sounds like it's just speeding.
We wish it were. It's not just speeding.
Okay.
It's a misdemeanor in Virginia. That's a big deal. Like a DUI is a misdemeanor. Like a stealing is a misdemeanor. Like assault and battery is a misdemeanor. So you're literally under the same classification, and that classification is a misdemeanor is up to 12 months in jail, up to a $2,500 fine. Will you get 12 months in jail and a $2,500 fine for reckless? Probably not.
Not on your first one.
Not on your first one, and I've never really seen that steep of a penalty. I also remember in a misdemeanor in Virginia, you're going to do literally half the sentence. So if the judge did say you've got 12 months, you would do 6 months, and if he gives you 30 days, you're going to do 15 days. So,
well, jail sounds really scary when you're talking about just going faster than the speed limit. Are there times, you said you don't usually see people get 12 months in jail, but are there speeds at which you see people getting active jail time?
Yeah, when you start to get above 90, I would say between 90 and 100 in almost every jurisdiction, you're going to get looked at for whether you should go to jail or not. Once you pass 100, you're probably going to jail. It's probably a matter of how much time you're going to get. And it really is an interesting thing. And like I said, for some judges, some jurisdictions, if you're over 95, they're looking at jail time in a day. They start off with a day or two, and then they kind of incrementally going up. So
it just depends really on where you are. Just because you're going 93 in Hanover County, and then you get busted for 93 in Goochland County, and let's just assume that it wasn't in a 25, right? You're not running down a residential street at 90 miles an hour, 93 miles an hour. But let's just say it's on the interstate, whichever interstate goes through these two counties. These two different judges may view 93 miles an hour differently, and therefore you may have a different consequence because they can do the $2,500 and the 12 months in jail.
They really can, and that's always on the table. And this is why we want you to know, first, what it is. Secondly, that it is a real penalty for this. And, the other thing is your point rate for, as you get demerit points, as the DMV calls them for this. This is one of your highest demerit points. It's 6 demerit points, which is a problem for insurance. It can jack your insurance up. So when you get a reckless driving, you get a misdemeanor if you get convicted. Number one. So that puts your maybe employment at risk, especially if you're in one of those places that, your security clearance or something like that, or they really watch that, or you're driving for your company and they see you get that stuff, they can get concerned about that. Then you have your points with, DMV, and if you get too many of those, they'll suspend your license administratively. And then third, your insurance can get really jacked up with reckless driving conviction. So that's our point. That's what we wanted to talk to you about. But, that's why it's really important to hire a lawyer when you get a reckless driving. Do not pay this ticket online or go to court and say, yeah, I did it, judge. And again, we're going to emphasize the same thing. If you get pulled over for reckless driving, you don't go, yes, sir, officer, I was going 102 miles an hour. You do not have any obligation. Remember this, folks. I know it's hard because we were taught to tell the truth. And it's not about telling the truth. You do not want to lie. You don't tell me you were going 50.
Right.
But you say, with all due respect, Your Honor, or your officer, I'm not going to answer that question. Because the first question is going to ask you, do you know how fast you were going?
And sometimes when you say, I'm not really sure how fast I was going, that's not even really helpful for you. It's just not. When you walk into court and that officer is going to say, the judge is going to ask him or her, what did they say to you? They said they didn't know how fast they were going. You weren't paying it. You were going 102 miles an hour. You weren't paying close enough attention to know that you were going even 100 or 95. So you just want to be careful how you answer the questions.
Yeah, and the best thing is, with all due respect, I'm going to get an attorney and get some help in this, and
they'll say that. They'll say that to the court. Yeah. They'll say, because the judge is going to still say, what did this person say when you pulled them over? They said they wanted to talk to an attorney. They wouldn't answer my questions. That's your right. That is your right to do that.
And you're still polite and cooperative, which is the key phrase in every traffic ticket I've ever had. Was the person polite and cooperative? Because the judges don't want you giving them harassment or give them any funky attitude, but saying with respectful attitude, thank you, sir, but with all due respect, I'm going to contact a lawyer, and I don't feel like I can answer that question right now. They understand that. They're nice guys, most of them. They're not.
And even if they're not, you need to be.
You need to be. You be nice and you be on your P's and Q's. And as we always say, in these interactions with police officers, your job is you have the right not to incriminate yourself. And you shouldn't incriminate yourself. So don't incriminate yourself. And sometimes that causes that moment to be much worse feeling than it should, because you really want to go, I'm so sorry and don't hurt me and you're going to let me off. And they don't usually let you off. So then you just admitted to doing it, and then you come in our office and say, well, I admitted to doing 102, and I want you to get me out of it. Not that that's impossible, because sometimes still there might be some wiggle room there, but...
Well, but there are some technical defenses that we can present to the court, that we can talk to you about when you call us to represent you in a reckless driving, that if you make a statement like, yeah, I know I was going 102, it is a little more difficult to raise some of those technical defenses, because you at least assumed you were going that fast, or told the police officer you thought you were.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes your car's off and your calibration can be off. It's not as much anymore, but it still happens. And
sometimes that happens with odd-sized tires.
Yeah,
right?
Especially when I see it a lot when young kids get the big tires on their trucks and things like that, or that really can throw off your calibration in your car. Sometimes what they call smashing your car down can create calibration issues. So there's things that can be done. So your car could be reading 82 miles an hour and you might be going 92. And that calibration, most judges go, well, it's your fault, but it's not your fault, in the sense of they'll give you a break on that and say, I'll take your calibration.
Right.
If you thought you were doing 82 and you were really doing 92,
that's a huge difference.
It's a huge difference. And so you're always looking to mitigate this charge. And, there's LiDAR and radar, and they have to tune those instruments, and they have to keep a calibration, and they have to keep it updated and logged. And when their certificate can be out of date. There's all kinds of things that can happen that we need to look at. But the biggest thing for us is for you to do your job, which we can't help you with, is when you're pulled over. Say as little as possible. You have to give driver's license, you have to give your registration, And if they ask for proof of insurance, you have to do your best to provide that. But that's it. Those are the 3 questions that you're required to under your permission to drive. Because remember, driving in Virginia is a privilege, not a right, which a lot of people argue, and I agree with that argument, but I'm just saying that's somehow how they look at it, how the court looks at it. So you're driving as a privilege, and the judge is going to say, well, and one of the things we didn't bring up in the penalty is they can take your license, obviously, for a period of time and suspend your license. So these are very, very serious charges, and that's why when you get pulled over, first, you need to know the law. So our takeaways, let me do that. Our takeaways are this. Know the law. If
Wait,
you were...
We're going to have to back up because there's a couple more things I think we should touch on.
Okay.
Are there circumstances...
Let's get a pause first.
Oh, okay. Are there circumstances, Scott, that make a reckless driving worse? In other words, say, what if there are children in the car? Does that make it worse?
Absolutely. So, for instance, if you're driving recklessly, you're 86 miles an hour, or you're 20 over the speed limit, then usually, if you have children in the car, they consider it, you put your children at risk. Mm-hmm. And so they can give you charges against your children for, all kinds of things, but that becomes a big issue, is your children in the car. And also judges just look at it much worse when you have a child in the car. They're like, really? You were driving 100 with your child in the car? They're not even looking at, because those initial charges are usually handled in the juvenile court. They wouldn't be handled with the judge in traffic court, but he still sees it and he's like, no. Attitude is a big one. Your attitude, your history. If you have 10 reckless drivings, the likelihood of you getting out of a reckless driving,
pretty slim.
And I see a lot of kids nowadays who like to do the little racing and things like that on the road, and that's causing all kinds of problem. And I'm seeing judges more and more and more tightening down, where I used to be able to do a lot more with some charges, this racing thing, and if the judge gets the inkling that it was some kind of racing, even if it wasn't proven, it really can hurt your case. Because people are getting hurt, that's the real issue. Mm-hmm. So the judges are trying to police that more, especially in Henrico County. I've noticed a big crackdown on that kind of behavior, and which, again, isn't wrong. When you're going down Broad Street at 65 miles an hour with all the traffic and people running across the road and all the things like that, a homicide, a vehicular homicide where somebody hits somebody and kills them is not out of the question.
Sure. Well, and when I was doing a lot of reckless driving, it's been a few years. I know that Scott here does them, and Will also here in our office handles a lot of reckless driving for us as well. But back when I was doing them, there were sometimes clues on the summons or your ticket about what you could expect the first time you went to court. So sometimes the time that you had to be in court was earlier if they were looking for active jail time. Is that still what your experience?
Not really anymore.
No.
I think post-COVID, dockets have just changed so dramatically that I don't know that that's really an issue. But really the issue is be polite and cooperative to the officer, even if you're in a bad mood and mad about being stopped. Take a deep breath before he walks up to the car, and just be polite and cooperative. Yes, sir, no, sir. And make eye contact. That's always important. So those little things, as long as the officer's saying you're polite and cooperative, he's done his job. He said, he's speeding, and if I don't have a technical defense on that, but then he says you're polite and cooperative, the judge may or may not be willing at that point to give you, like say you're at 87 miles an hour, he might drop you down enough to get you out of reckless.
Sure.
Excuse me. So that's a big deal. So sometimes just being polite, even if you say I'm not willing to talk, they still consider that polite and cooperative.
Well, and importantly, the penalties for reckless driving are different if you have a commercial driver's license, which we're not talking about that today. We have another podcast coming out very soon that will deal with commercial driver's licenses, CDLs, and the penalties for the various traffic infractions. But so we're not talking to you truck drivers just yet, but that's coming. That's coming. So be on the lookout for that podcast coming up. Scott, what are our 3 takeaways today?
I think number 1 is just to know, I think the biggest one is to know that at 85 miles an hour, regardless, you're in reckless territory, number 1. And number 2, just remembering that it's 20 miles over or 85. And then 2 is understanding that this is a serious penalty, a misdemeanor, the points on your license, the potential getting your license restricted or revoked, for a period of time. These things are a big deal. There's a big fine. It can be a really big fine. This can be a financial nightmare with your insurance company, jacking your rates and everything. So it's really important to understand that there is a serious penalty to this. This is not just speeding, and so that's number 2. And then finally, I think, is you really want to hire a lawyer if you got a reckless, so we can look at your case and try to find some of these loopholes and some of these things that may help you drop out of reckless and get to a speeding. Or maybe we can get the whole case dismissed, which has happened before. I mean, it's not like uncommon, but the number one goal when you have a reckless is to get you out of reckless, to get your points down, get your out of a misdemeanor, get out of the possibility of suspension, all those things. But we work, in that goal. First is to get you out of reckless. We can get you all the way out of the ticket completely. That's awesome. But that's what we're here to do. We're here to help. And in a reckless, you need an attorney.
That's a wrap for today.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of What to Do When. For more episodes, be sure to subscribe to our podcast, and we encourage you to check our archives to listen to previous topics. Tune in next week for a new episode and some fresh perspective from Critzer Cardani.